Hello and welcome to Dbs Tcg. This is the video regarding what is going on with Dragon Ball Super. So, this game I was very much intrigued by. I got into it a lot last year through set 2, and I was very amped up about the game. It seemed very balanced. It had a few things that were problems here and there, but for the most part, the game was very enjoyable and had a lot going for it. There was a lot of things that, much in this vein of like Hearthstone, took away some of the drawbacks of Magic and made it a little bit more straightforward. Similarly, Dragon Ball Super did the same thing. And so just to give you a heads up, this video is going to have quite a few references to Magic the Gathering, and I'm going to explain why, or try to give a little bit of detail as to each instance in which Magic, whenever I reference Magic, I'm going to explain why. But the reason why Magic is referenced so often in a lot of card games is because it's kind of like the OG and has the most mechanics and has the most things to date that make the game complicated as it is. And the game is complicated mechanically speaking. There's Pokemon, which is on one side of the scale, and then, Magic the Gathering, which is on the complete opposite side of the scale. So, and when I was in set 2, it felt like for me that that Dragon Ball Super was basically in the middle of the two. That it wasn't overly difficult, but it was good. It had more interaction than Pokemon did, and so I thought it was a very sweet game. So fast forward to where we are today, and we've got some big problems. Basically, what happened is Bandai decided to crank the game progression and power level to 11 too fast. So set 1 and set 2, they basically made it to where there was only a few good 1-drops. Basically there was only one good 1-drop that was a battle card, or 2 technically. You had Kaba and you had Boo. And basically there weren't really that many other good 1-drops that were battle cards. Now there were some good extra cards, but battle cards, there was really only a couple. And so because of that, inherently, when you don't have very many good early drops, your mid to late game is what's going to become the determining factor of who's going to win. And thus you're going to have essentially a longer game. Well, now in the current set 4, we have a deck such as the swap deck that is basically able to go off pretty consistently turn 2. Now, those that were around for the Mecha Frieza tyranny, I guess you could say, remember that the deck that deck also went off pretty early, pretty consistently, and did some pretty crazy things. And they had to basically nerf it into the ground. They had to send out, basically making an errata to where it was only once a turn, and you can only do it on your opponent's turn. So there was a lot of things that they took with the Mecha Frieza to bring it back into parity to make it not such a broken card. But what the game has shown me inherently is quite a few things, and I'm going to go over because they sent out basically a thought process behind their set 5, and so I'm going to have some things to discuss about that, each one of those. But basically, in a nutshell, I remember when I was trying to teach someone, I was teaching a friend. I would say teaching. Let me take that back. Someone was newer to the game. His name was Darnell, and he was learning how to play, and he was learning how to play in set 3. Well, when he was playing, he didn't realize that overwhelm was only a once per turn thing. So he was able to overwhelm multiple times in a turn, and he was like, man, this is broken. Like, you don't understand. Like, man, I was having so much fun. And his fun felt like he got squashed on because he could only do it now once a turn. Well, fast forward to set 4, and there's a leader that allows you to overwhelm more than once a turn, and it's not even played. Like, that's crazy, because overwhelm is a powerful effect. And if you can overwhelm multiple times a turn, like he was able to do, he technically was doing in set 3, and he did it wrong. He realized he was doing it wrong. But he was like, man, that was just absolutely busted. And it's true. What he was able to do in those turns was busted. But that's the thing is like, even something that he deemed was incredibly broken and unfair is not even powerful enough to see the top 0, or the top decks in the format. So basically, from what we've seen thus far, and I think this is evident, is that Bandai is listening to player feedback. And I think to their own fault they're doing so. Sometimes they have to understand that not all players know what is good for the game. There are some that understand game design really well and know how to do critiquing, but for the most part, there's a lot of people that, DBS might be their very first card game, and so they don't know what's good for the card game. They just know they may not like it, or they might not like how this particular deck plays. So getting feedback in a general sense can be a double-edged sword, and you have to be careful with it. But we do know that they're listening because we've seen things like the Mecha errata. We've seen things like time control Cronoa come in, and time control Cronoa is basically something that they made in response to a card because they realized that the card was that Sugesh was too powerful of a card. And so there's a couple things here that prove to me where they are. First and foremost is that they don't have enough play testers. They don't have enough people that are running through the cards and playing the different decks to verify whether or not certain cards interact the way they do. I think that basically Veggies, Genju Veggies was like just basically missed. I don't think they foresaw that was going to be a thing. I think if Sugesh made it to where it was only yellow Saiyans, that would have changed the game too. They would have had no reason to print Time Control Cronoa, because the Goku, the 3-drop Goku, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, you lose your one guy, but you don't, at least they don't flood the board with dudes, battle cards at that point. So with all that said, let's get to the discussion of what they said they're going to do. And I'm hopeful. But what I'm going to go over is their points in a nutshell, and give my response to them. So first and foremost, they bring up the game speed, or the kill turn. So this is going to be the first reference to Magic that I'm going to make. But basically, one of the most popular competitive formats in Magic is called Modern. And Modern is a decent-sized card pool that had that has the new card frame and blah blah blah. But basically, in a nutshell, it is it's a set of cards that are legal for this format, and the concept that Wizards had for this format was that they wanted to make it a turn 4 format, that you basically couldn't kill your opponent consistently before turn 4. That's where they wanted to keep it. So right now, the game speed with the new decks and at the highest competitive level, we're at turn 2 to turn 3, never past turn 4. Like, it's pretty ridiculous. And so their explanation was that, basically in set 1, they didn't realize that people were going to go and play so conservatively. Well, a lot of people were new to the game and were trying to understand the mechanics of the game, and it's hard you shouldn't make your long-term adjustments based on the first set of your game. That's just bad logic. So they thought by upping the power level of the cards that it would reduce the turns, the kill turn. It did, too much so. And so a lot of people are getting upset because it's insanely fast. And basically, when you have a game that is so fast you can't even get past turn 4, it's hard to get into their second point. All right, so their second point that they wanted to talk about was deck archetypes, saying that in set 5 they're going to be doing some new deck archetypes, and they're going to be fixing old deck archetypes. And so for those that don't know what an archetype is basically how your deck functions. And so there's multiple different types of archetypes. There's combo, there's control, there's aggro, mid-range, mill, and tempo. Now, a lot of these archetypes are derived from Magic. Again, Magic is kind of like the godfather of card games. So a lot of the card games take their inspiration from Magic. Now, when you have a turn 3, let's just say turn 2 to turn 3 format, really the only thing that you can genuinely have is aggro. Now, there might be a slower version of aggro, and so there are people who are trying to say, well, oh, this is the control deck. Well, you can't you really technically can't have a control deck when it's a turn 4 format. It's just or you can't. I'm sorry, not a turn 4 format, but when you're the turn 2 or turn 3 is the kill turn, it's almost impossible to have a control deck to really shine and do its thing. And so basically right now we kind of have the swap deck, and I know there's people out there running around calling it Storm, and that is just the most wrong term possible for that deck. It's definitely not Storm. Just stick to again, using Magic. That's where it comes from, is Storm. So the swap deck is basically somewhat of a combo aggro deck, and in that you're playing a lot of cards that are hyper aggressive, and you're able to chain it together. Now, it's not an infinite combo or anything, but you're able to do multiple things a turn in the same turn with the same cards. So it's kind of like a combo, but it's still an aggressive deck. But basically, if they bring in stuff like what I'm guessing they're going to do, is bring in like mill. And the mill archetype, basically mill comes from a term that is basically from Magic, and it's from a card where it's called Millstone, and basically you take the cards from the top of your opponent's library and put them into the graveyard. But in this instance, it would be your opponent's drop zone. And so basically, in most card games, when you have no cards left, you die. That's kind of like premise of almost every card game that exists. Like if you have no more cards in your library, then you just lose. So that would be a sweet archetype if they go to explore that. Tempo, however, is probably going to be the most difficult for this game to achieve correctly, because all the creatures have the ability to attack the turn they come down. Haste from Magic's standpoint. So when every creature can come down and attack the battle card can every time a battle card can come down and attack the turn it comes out, it's hard to have a genuine tempo swing. Now, typically tempo comes in the form of like, hey, bounce your creature back to your hand, or blow up your lands, or in this instance, sorry for using Magic terminology, but blow up your energy. So things like that. And so you create either a tempo positive for yourself, you either gain energy, which does happen in DBS, but the tempo positive stuff that the player does is kind of different. But next up, their discussion went to interactivity, which I think is the biggest contention of this whole conversation and would drastically change the game. So they gave up a couple of examples of why they are hesitant about creating more interactivity. And basically, what they're trying to say is we want to create a situation where there's no counter spells, where that counter spells don't exist. And counter spells are basically from Magic, and it says that whatever you're trying to play, you can't play. Okay. So one of the arguments against interactivity that they give is they want to mimic the fast-paced battles from DBS, or from Dragon Ball in general. And I remember watching Dragon Ball as a kid and thinking, like, how many episodes is it gonna be when Goku finishes powering up the Spirit Bomb? He's been doing it for like 3 episodes, 4 episodes. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. So fast-paced battles, that's a little bit of a stretch. Then another argument they came into play with was new players. That they may find that the decks are that it's unfun or difficult to play because they're not able to play their stuff, or it's harder to learn what they should be playing as the interactive spell. Like, should I be countering this card and whatnot? Well, I will take that a step further and use an argument to that. Well, in Magic, if I'm teaching someone how to play Magic for the first time, more times than not, I'm going to try to teach them on green, because green is typically the easiest color to learn. And there's a reason behind that. If you want to jump into, if you were trying to teach someone the basics of the card game, you generally want to go with the easiest to learn. And so, but with every game on the planet, there's a learning curve. Now, it depends on how steep that curve is, that matters, but for the most part, there is going to be a learning curve in anything. So they're either selling new players short, or they're just not understanding how their own card game works, I guess. I don't know. But I will say that they in set 3 created the starter deck of the Black Mass Saiyan deck that had Overwhelm cards in it. And that's a pretty difficult mechanic for a new player just starting out trying to learn the game. It's a pretty powerful mechanic, but it's not just, very easy to just pick up and understand. I mean, I would personally think so. But they had it as a starter deck. So, I mean, it's like, come on, man. So at this point, we're going to go over some examples that they brought up that's going to be the game changers. Okay. So for the, I believe it was during the, game speed discussion. They brought up this, this sample card that it was in the certain color, and if it was tapped or in rest mode, they couldn't attack your leader, which is basically the Bergamo effect from the tournament, the small set, the tournament power. And like, that's fine, but just because you show the people an example of what might be to come, you're leaving out key information, the biggest of which is the energy cost. If the energy cost for the card is over 3, then it does no good for the format. It does no good. Not at all. Because we already just discussed how Swaps is able to kill the opponent by turn 2, turn 3 at the latest. But most of the time turn 2. So, with the other examples and the interactivity examples, they gave these 2 really powerful effects, but in both of those cases, it cost 2 energy to do that effect. And so you have to have access to 2 energy to do that on your turn, because it's activate main. Again, like, unless the card is 1 energy to play, and then you could do it on your next turn, that would be something. But I just don't see, like, these cards, what they presented is lacking so much information that it's hard to make any kind of real judgment. But from what I'm gathering, it doesn't look like that's going to cover what the problem is, because it's going to be still too slow. And then lastly, they're like, hey, check out Shenron, right? So again, not having any information about what the Dragon Ball cards are, how easy it is to get these cards from the deck, what the wishes are, or how powerful these wishes are. I mean, we can imagine that the wishes are powerful, but we don't know. How many Dragon Ball cards are you allowed to have in your deck? Or is it only the 7, or like, what's the deal? We have no idea. And so it is cool to see something as a new design. I think that's very creative, but like, not having context is huge. You have to know, I don't know. I think they're showing too many. They're showing things, but then they're not showing things. So it doesn't really solve anything. And so, in closing, basically the format is too far forward. They have pushed the format too fast, too powerful. And if they don't create interactivity, or more interactivity, then there's going to be a problem in which you basically have, now granted, I've never personally played Yu-Gi-Oh, but from what other people have told me that play Yu-Gi-Oh on a regular basis, is basically you take your turn, then I take my turn, and then that goes on for 2 turns and the game is over. That doesn't sound great to me. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players out there. They enjoy that, and that's fine. But as a whole, I don't think that that's what Dragon Ball Super was going for either as a concept. I think that they want interactivity between the different plays. And so I'm basically waiting in limbo to see what is going to happen with set 5. I think this is the big point, because if they go even further or don't cover the problem enough, then they've basically oopsed their entire game. And one of the big things about it, comparing Magic to DBS again, is it's like the opposite of kind of how Standard exists, or the Magic game exists, where the newest sets that come out are very powered down compared to the original sets. So basically, the Standard format is the most recent 2 years of sets. And so it doesn't have access to the 25 years worth of cards, but Legacy and Vintage does. And that format is super powerful. It's got some very, very powerful and broken cards. But the most recent sets, not so much. They're powered down on the level, and thus, it makes for a completely different experience. Whereas right now, one could say that the broken cards are something like Unyielding Shield, the Trunks Energy Untapped card. It's blanking me right now, or Sensu Bean, and that's that's part of it, sure. But I'll give you an example: the Apes deck, right? The Apes deck, when it first came out, I thought basically, that linchpin card of the deck was King Vegeta, the 3-drop, and it's not even played anymore. Like, that card is just not even in the deck because that is just too slow. That's insane. That what card looked like to be basically the best card, or basically one of the enablers of the deck outside of Planet Vegeta, is a card that's not even played anymore because it's just too slow. Or even look at something like Jiren. The 4-drop Jiren in red, Fist of Justice, I believe, is just not even played except for in the sideboard against Apes. And that card was at one point, a really powerful, strong card because it could attack active battle cards. So it basically right now is the power level is on the front side on the most recent sets. And the thing is you can't ban an entire set because it's the one that just came out. It doesn't make sense that you would ban that. So I think there are a few, there are more cards that are at a high power level right now. And so set 5 is going to be possibly the turning point. And that's why I'm going to wait to invest any more money into the card game myself personally, because I want to see where things go. If they crank it from 11 to 12, it's game over. It's game over, man. And that stinks because I really enjoyed how it was. But I don't dictate the cards. I don't make the cards, so there's nothing I can really do about it. But I hope you guys enjoyed the rant that I went on about this card game. And if you guys want to leave your thoughts down below, if you have rebuttals, go ahead and leave those down below, because it is a discussion.